All right, a couple things which I want to explain before I go to the board, and they're going to help you understand some things about our final message tonight before we wrap it up. First of all, we have lost a few people in the ministry over the years because I don't really appreciate miracles as they're described in the Christian church, meaning I don't like the replication of, or the pretended replication of biblical miracles here in the body. I do believe God is a God of miracles, but I tend to believe those miracles are sort of either without man at all involved, meaning you don't need faith healers. God will heal. There's the miracle. You don't need the slap head up guys. Or I believe that man is completely involved, and it's a miracle when they do things like restore people's sight through modern medicine. So that's how I see it. I see it as a miracle that a doctor can restore someone's sight because of the knowledge God has given them. And I see when someone is healed miraculously from some disease that it's a miracle too. I just don't see the need for faith healers. I don't see the need for people trying to replicate what happened in the New Testament and healing the blind and getting the crippled to walk and the lame to walk and all that stuff. In other words, I'm suspect of Christian faith healers slapping foreheads and praying on people who have arthritis and getting them to walk across the stage. That being said, I know that God is a God of grand miracles. I know this personally, which I'm going to describe to you in a second. The second thing I want to talk about is in harmony with a story that comes in John 9. There's a man born blind. He was healed by Jesus, and he was subsequently taken before the religious rulers of his day, the Sadducees and Pharisees, and they peppered him with questions, and they were getting repetitive in their questions. The man who was born blind started answering nicely, but over time he started to get bold because these guys were trying to make Jesus out to be something bad. Jesus, a bad guy, healed him and gave him his sight. At one point, the man was asked if Jesus was a sinner, and he responds in verse 25, whether he be a sinner or not, I don't know. One thing I know, that whereas I was blind, now I see. That's what he said. We have had a lot of discussions here on Heart of the Matter about the nature of Jesus. Some of them have been heated and accusatory, even to the point where fellowship has been excluded and you're not going to shake hands as a brother and things like that, because of questions I have about the makeup of God, and etc. But what I can say, without question, like the blind man, is that where I was once considered unhealable by the modern sages of my day, I have been healed. This healing it continues to be a miracle in my life and in the life of those who know me. Last year we did a show called The Narcissistic Supply. And I spoke to this situation because I said in that show that I am a narcissist. And that's how I came into the world, and that is a trait that is present in my flesh, narcissism. And it's probably part of the McCraney family tree. The way I look at my brothers and sisters, I'm sure it's there. So the current take on true narcissism is they cannot be cured. A real narcissist can't be cured. Recently, I was introduced to a long-term study by a doctor in Canada by the name of Dr. Robert Hare. And the study is on psychopaths, or what they call psychopathy. And as a world leader in this field, Dr. Hare took his lifelong studies and he simmered them down to 20 questions. 20 questions, and he said the person needs to rate themselves. If they have no relation at all to the question or to what is presented, it's a 0. If they have some relation to the topic, they get a 1. And if they have a lot of relationship to the topic presented, they get a 2. And I took the test by myself, and then I sat down with Mary, my wife. She's known me since I was 17 years old. And we read through them, and she straight across gave the same answers in numbers, 0, 1, or 2, that I had given on the 20 questions. Now, there's a tendency to score these things, depending on what outcome you want, sort of to slant it, to answer it one way if you want to be a psychopath, or another way if you don't want to be seen as a psychopath. But I'm going to show you honest-to-God scores from my own mind, and then what Mary said about me, and we're going to start with prior to my knowing the Lord. This is while I was a Mormon. This was when I was younger and involved in that faith and not a Christian. So let me go to the board and let's work through this really quickly. Here are Robert Hare's questions, and I'm going to read them. And then in this box right here, I'm going to give you the score that I gave myself and that my wife concurred with me on her score of me prior to my coming to know the Lord. The person's glib and has superficial charm. That means that they have a tendency to be smooth, engaging, charming, slick, and verbally facile. Psychopathic charm is not in the least shy. It's not self-conscious. It's not afraid to say anything. A psychopath never gets tongue-tied. They can also be a great listener and stimulate empathy while zeroing in on people's targets and vulnerabilities. They have a great ability to manipulate. I get a 2 prior to knowing the Lord. That's the highest in terms of my narcissistic, psychopathic personality, which cannot be cured. The prisons are full of guys like me. Grandiose self-worth, grossly inflated view of one's worth and abilities, cocky, a braggart. They believe they're superior to other human beings. I got a 2 from both my wife and myself. Need for stimulation or a proneness to constant boredom. An excessive need for novel, thrilling, exciting stimulation, taking chances, doing things that are risky. Psychopaths often have a low self-discipline in carrying tasks through to completion because they get bored so easily. Definitely a 2. Pathological lying. I don't need to explain it. A 2. I lied like a banshee, whether Mormon or not. As a child, I lied. Conning and manipulative. I don't have to explain it. A 2. Lack of guilt or remorse. I only had a 1 because there were times when I would feel badly for hurting people in certain ways. It's not a 0, but it wasn't at the height. Shallow affect, meaning emotional poverty or lack of depth of feeling for other people. Interpersonal coldness in spite of what was going on in front of me. That was a 2. Callousness or lack of empathy, cold, tactless, a 2. Parasitic lifestyle, an intentional, manipulative, selfish, and exploitative financial dependence on others. Low self-discipline and ability to carry through with one's obligations. I was a stockbroker. I had a parasitic lifestyle. Combined with all these pathological lying and these other traits, you're able to convince people to get into things that they don't need because it benefits you, because it pays out higher. Absolutely a grand 2. And then poor behavioral controls. That's a 7. That would have been a 7 in my world, but we can only give it a 2. We go over to promiscuous sexual behavior, a 2. Early behavioral problems, a 2. Lack of realistic long-term goals, a 2. Impulsivity, a 2. Irresponsibility was a 1. Failure to accept responsibility was a 1. Many short-term relationships, a 2. Juvenile delinquency, a 2. I think it was a 2. Revocation of release, that means that someone gives you a chance to redeem yourself, like a court says, I'll give you a chance to redeem yourself. We're going to put you on probation, and you break probation. I gave myself a 1 in that when I was put on probation. I followed through once, and another time I didn't. And then criminal versatility. It means you enjoy the fact that you know how to do a number of different criminal things. And I think that was a 1 or a 2. I'm not going to add them up, but my score when I did it, because I may have missed 1 point or 2 here and there, was a 36 out of 40. From my wife's mouth, from my mouth. Absolutely. There was no chance for me as a human being to function morally in this world. It was as if I was born blind, deaf, and mute. It was if I was Helen Keller in her day. They couldn't do anything for her. In my psychopathy and narcissistic supply needs, it was an endless thing. So on the show, maybe you've heard me say, I am the worst of the worst, saved by the best of the best. And people haven't understood what that means. But this is why this one reason I'm doing it. So, after the Lord, glib and superficial charm gets a 1. Grandiose self-worth is a flat-out 0. Before the Lord and before others. I have nothing to offer, and I know it. Need for stimulation and proneness to boredom, absolute 0. I am never bored with the word and with the work and the things I'm doing. Pathological lying. I strive very hard to be honest. I don't have a difficulty with honesty anymore. Conning and manipulativeness, a 0. I try not to manipulate anybody. By the grace of God, by the Spirit in Him. I don't like to manipulate people. I don't like to control anybody. I want people to do what they want to do versus manipulate them into doing what I want them to do. I can't stand it now. It's the biggest miracle that you can imagine if you look at the earlier scores. What are we on? Number 6. And I'm just going to fill them in. A 0. Shallow affect, a 0. Lack of empathy, a 0. Parasitic lifestyle, reverse. I go to great lengths to avoid the tendency to live off other people's money and funds. I work very hard to just try to keep that clean because I can see what it does to people, but it also gives me a really keen BS indicator because I can see when it's being done, which is why I rail against the manipulation of funds within churches today. Number 10. Poor behavior controls. A 1. If I'm driving and someone ticks me off, I can still lose it. I can still have a very poor, immediate response to some things. Number 11, promiscuous sexual behavior is a 0. I had to look. Earlier behavior problems gives me a 2 because you can't change what was earlier. Lack of realistic long-term goals, I think I gave a 1 because I still have flighty ideas. Impulsivity, I'm much less. In fact, I think I gave myself in 14 a 0 in that. No, I gave myself a 1. I guess I'm still some impulsive. Irresponsibility is a 0. Failure to accept responsibility, a 0. Many short-term relationships, a 0. Juvenile delinquency, couldn't change it, so it's there. Revocation of release, a 0. And criminal versatility, I think I still enjoy that about myself, so I got a 1. And I think in the end, what do we have? 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. I think my score was an 8. I have 9 up here, but an 8. From a 36 to an 8, no bull shite. None. In our day and age, it would be crazy for somebody who's involved in teaching the word and pastoring people to admit that they are psychopathic and narcissistic. But it comes with the territory that we're supposed to have with our humility and admitting our faults. That even if I tried, I couldn't get on the high road That's why he was able to pull me up and save me from it. Usually pastors have either been raised in a good Christian family, and one time in college they tried to smoke pot, or they came from being Hell's Angels and bikers and beer drinkers and partiers and then Satanists, and then they saw the Lord and changed. But you just don't hear psychopathy and narcissism as deeply embedded in a person as it was in me come up. Having been a true psychopath with a constant need to narcissistic supply is a terrifying thing, and it's a terrifying person to live with. My wife can attest to that. It would require a miracle in the hands of God to change that person. These things still reside in my flesh. I know that if I gave a few months and I said, I don't care about God, I turn from him, forget his scripture, I'm going to go back to just really feeding my flesh, it would be a terrifying scene because I know what I'm capable of. But I believe God wanted to use this ugly narcissistic personality to break me down and to give me this unbelievable healing like the man born blind. To any atheist who tells me there's no evidence of God, any atheist, there's no evidence of God, I'll stand toe to toe with them, and they'll say that's just your experience. I'll say I don't care whose experience it is. I don't have to go to talking about science and evolution and all the arguments you guys want to get in. I'll just tell you where I was once blind, I now see. And he's a healer. If you want him to heal you, he will. If you allow him in your life, he'll heal the most devastating aspects of your person. But you have to want to draw to him. You have to desire to have that, and you have to allow that work to take place. This is my witness to the Christians as well, who say that I'm not a Christian. That they can say, well, you know, you don't believe this doctrine, or you don't practice this theology, or whatever. They can say what they want. All I can say to them is, I was once blind, and now I see. I don't care what your opinion is. I know that my Lord saved me. I know he's a God of miracles. And I know that he can take the worst person in the flesh and gently over, I mean, it's been 20 years, over a lot of time, work with you and bring you around to a place that is better for you, better for those around you, better in your relationship with him.